The new VP, Derek Paulson, shoved past our 3 visiting clients in the hallway outside Conference Room B, coffee sloshing from their cups onto their suits. "I don't see them standing," he smirked over his shoulder at me, not bothering to apologize. I watched Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Patterson, and their notary, a quiet woman named Janet Cooper, exchange glances. Janet set down her leather portfolio, carefully removed her official notary seal and embosser, placed them in her bag, and walked toward the elevator. My stomach dropped. That seal was supposed to notarize Exhibit C for tomorrow's $980 million pitch. I bolted after Janet, my heels clicking frantically against the polished marble floor. The elevator doors were sliding shut, but I managed to wedge my hand between them. Janet looked at me with kind but tired eyes as I stepped inside, breathless. "Janet, please," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I know that was completely unacceptable. I'm so sorry. Derek is new, and he doesn't understand how we work here." She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and spoke calmly, her voice steady. "Lindsay, I've been a notary for 19 years. My seal represents my integrity and my commitment to professionalism. I won't notarize documents for people who treat others with such blatant disrespect. Those clients came here in good faith, and your VP literally knocked coffee onto their clothing without a word of apology." The elevator descended smoothly toward the lobby. I felt panic rising in my chest. "I completely understand your position. You're absolutely right. But this deal with Westbridge Capital closes tomorrow morning. $980 million. Your notarization of Exhibit C is critical to the entire transaction." Janet's expression softened slightly. She could see I was genuinely distressed. "I'm sympathetic to your situation. I truly am. But a notary's seal is her integrity. I cannot and will not notarize anything for people who demonstrate that level of contempt for basic courtesy. I'm sorry, Lindsay." The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened, and Janet stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight streaming through the glass lobby. I watched helplessly as she walked through the revolving door and disappeared onto the busy downtown street. I stood there for a moment, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. Then my professional instincts kicked in. I needed to tell my boss, Carol Hendricks, immediately. This was a crisis that required senior management intervention. I took the elevator back up to the 12th floor where Carol's office was located. Her assistant, a pleasant woman named Dana, looked up from her computer. "Is Carol available?" "It's urgent," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Dana glanced at her screen. "She's on a call with the Houston office. Should be about 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like an eternity, but I had no choice. I paced outside Carol's office, checking my phone repeatedly, willing Janet to respond to the voicemail I'd left. Finally, Carol's door opened, and she waved me in. Carol Hendricks was a no-nonsense woman in her mid-50s who had built her career on efficiency and results. She sat behind her large desk, already looking at her next meeting on her calendar. "What is it, Lindsay?" "I have budget reviews in 10 minutes. I explained quickly what had happened with Derek, the clients, and Janet leaving. Carol's expression barely changed as she listened. "Derek Paulson is the new VP of Business Development," she said when I finished. "He personally brought in over $20 million in new business last quarter alone. Find another notary." Carol, Janet Cooper, was specifically requested by Westbridge Capital. Their legal team knows her work. She has a reputation for being meticulous and thorough. That's why they wanted her on this deal. Carol waved her hand dismissively, then smoothed it over with her. "Apologize. Send flowers, whatever it takes. That's part of your job as Senior Transaction Coordinator. Don't bring me personnel drama. Make it work." I left Carol's office feeling even more anxious than before. I tried calling Janet's office number again. Voicemail. I sent an email explaining the situation and apologizing profusely. No response. I sent a text message to the cell phone number she'd provided for coordination purposes. The message showed as read within minutes, but no reply came. My hands were shaking slightly as I walked down the corridor toward Derek's office. I needed to make him understand the severity of what he'd caused. Maybe if he apologized directly to Janet, she would reconsider. Derek's office was on the corner of the building with windows overlooking the city skyline. His door was half open, and I could hear him talking loudly on speakerphone, laughing about something. I knocked gently. "Yeah, come in," he called out, not looking up from his computer screen where he was typing while talking. I stepped inside. Derek was still on his call. "I'm telling you, man, these local vendors think they're so important. It's pathetic. They act like we should bow down because they have some little certification. Please." The person on the other end laughed. Derek finally glanced up at me and held up one finger, indicating I should wait. I stood there awkwardly for another 3 minutes while he finished his conversation about his weekend golf plans. "All right, what's up?" he said when he finally ended the call, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. "We have a serious problem with tomorrow's closing," I began. Janet Cooper, the notary, left the building. She won't be notarizing Exhibit C. Derek's face showed mild annoyance rather than concern. "So get another notary. What do I pay you people for?" Westbridge specifically requested Janet. She's known to their legal counsel. They trust her work. Derek's expression darkened. He sat forward abruptly. "Wait, you let a notary walk out? Over what? Hurt feelings because I didn't hold the door open or something? You physically shoved past the clients in the hallway and spilled coffee on them. You were dismissive and rude. Janet felt disrespected and she left." Derek's jaw tightened. He picked up his desk phone and dialed a number from memory. After a moment, someone answered. "Tom, hey, it's Derek. Yeah, listen, we might have a situation with the Westbridge closing tomorrow. Lindsay here failed to secure the notary for the transaction and apparently created some kind of personnel incident. I just found out about it. Yeah, I think you should hear her explanation directly." "Okay, we'll be right there." He hung up and looked at me with cold eyes. "CEO wants to see you. Now." My heart sank into my stomach. Derek had just completely misrepresented what happened and made it sound like I was at fault. I followed him down the hall to Tom Bradford's executive suite, my mind racing through how to explain the truth. Tom Bradford's office was intimidating, filled with awards and photographs of him with various politicians and business leaders. He was a man in his early 60s with silver hair and a stern demeanor. He gestured for us to sit in the chairs across from his massive mahogany desk. "Lindsay, Derek tells me we have a problem with the Westbridge closing. Explain." I took a deep breath and started to describe what really happened. How Derek had physically pushed past the clients and showed disrespect, prompting Janet to leave. But Tom cut me off before I could finish. "Derek brought Westbridge to this firm. This is a career-defining deal for us. The fees alone will fund our expansion plans for the next 2 years. Are you seriously telling me you can't fix this?" "I've tried reaching Janet multiple times. She's firm in her decision," I said. Derek jumped in smoothly. "Tom, I think there may have been a misunderstanding in the hallway yesterday. I was rushing to a call. But the bottom line is that vendor management is Lindsay's responsibility. She should have ensured all parties were confirmed and committed. This is a failure of coordination." Tom looked at me hard. "Lindsay, you've been with us for 7 years. You're a senior transaction coordinator. This is basic stuff. Get Janet Cooper back here by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, or you're done. Not just on this deal. Done here. Do you understand me?" The finality in his voice made my blood run cold. I nodded, unable to speak, and left his office feeling like the walls were closing in. I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen without really seeing it. My career was on the line because Derek Paulson couldn't be bothered to show basic courtesy to clients. The injustice of it burned in my chest, but I couldn't afford to think about fairness right now. I needed solutions. I looked up Janet's business address and grabbed my car keys. Her office was in a professional building about 30 minutes away in the suburbs. Maybe if I showed up in person, demonstrated how serious this was, she would reconsider. Traffic was heavy as I drove through the late afternoon rush. My mind kept replaying Tom's words, "You're done here." 7 years of hard work, of arriving early and staying late, of managing impossible deadlines and difficult personalities, all of it about to disappear because of one arrogant man's behavior. Janet's office building was a modest 2-story structure that housed various professional services. I found her suite number on the directory and climbed the stairs. The frosted glass door had her name and credentials etched professionally. Janet Cooper, Notary Public, Certified Signing Agent. I tried the handle. Locked. The lights inside were off. I knocked anyway, hoping she might be in a back room. No response. I stood there for several minutes, feeling desperate and foolish. I pulled out my phone and searched for Janet's home address through a professional networking site. It felt like crossing a line, but I was out of options. Her house was another 20 minutes away, in a quiet residential neighborhood. The sun was setting as I pulled up to a neat ranch-style home with a well-maintained garden. Lights were on inside. I could see the flicker of a television through the front window. I walked up to the door and rang the bell. Nothing. I rang again and waited. I could hear movement inside, but no one came to the door. I knew Janet was home. She was choosing not to answer. "Janet, please," I called through the door. "I just need 5 minutes. I'm not here to pressure you. I just need to talk." Silence. After another minute, I gave up and walked back to my car, fighting back tears of frustration. I spent the next 2 hours calling every professional reference Janet had listed on her business website. Other notaries, attorneys she'd worked with, business associates. Everyone was sympathetic, but firm. Word had spread quickly through the notary community about what happened. Several people told me they respected Janet's decision to walk away from disrespectful treatment. One notary, an older gentleman named Frank Stevenson, was particularly direct. "Look, young lady, notaries are professionals. We're commissioned by the state. We're not servants who can be pushed around. If your company can't treat people with basic respect, that's your problem, not Janet's." By 7 o'clock that evening, I'd exhausted every contact I could find. I had 14 hours until the closing, and I was no closer to a solution. I shifted to Plan B, finding an alternative notary acceptable to Westbridge. I researched notaries with similar credentials and experience to Janet. I found 2 who seemed promising and called them both. The first, a woman named Diane Crawford, listened to my situation and then said carefully, "I'm sorry, but I've already heard about this. Several of us in the professional community were discussing it this afternoon. I don't feel comfortable working with your firm given the circumstances." The second notary, a man named Robert Chen, was more direct. "Is this for a deal involving Derek Paulson?" "Yeah, I've heard of him. His reputation is already making the rounds." "I'll pass, thanks." I felt sick. How had Derek's reputation spread so quickly? Then I remembered his speakerphone conversation, how casually he'd mocked local vendors. That attitude had probably been on display before. I considered more extreme options. Could I fly in a notary from another state? I researched the requirements and discovered that while it might be technically possible, Westbridge's counsel had specifically requested Janet because of a previous working relationship on similar large-scale transactions. They valued her attention to detail and her understanding of complex financial documentation. At 9 o'clock that night, sitting alone in my apartment with cold coffee and growing desperation, I received an email that made everything worse. The sender was Amanda Rothstein, General Counsel for Westbridge Capital. The subject line read, "Clarification needed tomorrow's closing." My hands trembled as I opened it. "Dear Lindsay, my assistant informed me there was an incident involving contracted vendors for tomorrow's transaction. Before we proceed, I need clarification on the status of all parties and documentation. Please confirm that all requirements outlined in our engagement letter are being met. Best regards, Amanda Rothstein." The email was copied to Tom Bradford and Derek Paulson. Before I could even begin to formulate a response, Derek replied to all, "Amanda, everything is handled. This was a minor coordination issue being resolved by our staff. All parties will be present and prepared tomorrow morning. Looking forward to a smooth closing. Best, Derek." Then he forwarded the entire thread to me privately with a single line. "See what you've done? Fix this tonight or I'll make sure you never work in this industry again." I stared at that message, feeling the weight of the threat. Derek had essentially promised Amanda that everything was fine while privately threatening to destroy me if I couldn't make it fine. He was positioning himself to take credit if somehow I managed to fix this, and to annihilate me if I failed. But then, something else occurred to me. I pulled up the deal documents, specifically the sections related to Exhibit C. As I read through the requirements more carefully, my heart sank even further. Exhibit C required three-party notarization. This meant the buyer's signature, the seller's signature, and the financial intermediary's signature all had to be notarized together in the same session. It wasn't enough to have a notarized document prepared in advance. Janet herself had to be physically present at tomorrow's closing to witness all three parties signing and then notarize their signatures simultaneously. There was no workaround, no substitute, no way to fake this. Janet Cooper had to walk into that conference room tomorrow morning, or the deal could not legally close. I put my head in my hands and tried not to cry. I didn't sleep that night. At 11 o'clock, I tried calling Janet one more time. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. I left a message, and I'm not proud to say my voice broke as I spoke. Janet, this is Lindsay again. I know you don't want to hear from me. I know what Derek did was inexcusable, but my entire career is on the line here. 7 years of work. I have student loans. My mother has medical bills I help with. My rent in this city is crushing me. I'm begging you to reconsider. Not for the firm, not for Derek, for me, please. I hung up and stared at my phone, willing it to ring. It didn't. At some point around 2 in the morning, I must have fallen asleep on my couch, still wearing my work clothes. I woke to my alarm at 5:30 a.m., disoriented and filled with dread. I showered and dressed mechanically, my mind numb. I checked my email compulsively. At 5:45, a new message appeared from Janet Cooper, time-stamped 5:30 a.m. Lindsay, I received your voicemail last night. I want you to know that I'm genuinely sorry for your situation. You seem like a good person caught in a bad circumstance. However, I cannot in good conscience return to your firm. My professional reputation is built on integrity and self-respect. I've spent nearly 2 decades establishing trust with clients and legal professionals. I cannot compromise that for any amount of money or pressure. I wish you the very best in resolving this situation and in your career going forward. Sincerely, Janet Cooper. I read the email 3 times, each time hoping the words would somehow be different. They weren't. I had 3 hours until the 9 o'clock pitch meeting, and I had nothing. I drove to the office in the dark pre-dawn hours. The building was mostly empty except for security and a few early arriving executives. I went straight to Tom Bradford's office at 7 o'clock, knowing he was always in early. His assistant wasn't there yet, but his door was open. He was reading something on his tablet, a cup of coffee steaming on his desk. "Tom, I need to talk to you," I said from the doorway. He looked up, his expression already hardening. "Tell me you have good news." I stepped inside and closed the door. "I need you to understand what really happened." Derek physically pushed past our clients. He spilled coffee on them. He was openly disrespectful. That's why Janet left. This isn't about hurt feelings or poor coordination on my part. Derek caused this situation. I pulled out my phone and showed him Derek's threatening email from the night before. "Look at this. He's threatening to destroy my career if I can't fix the problem he created." Tom barely glanced at the screen. "Derek's methods may be rough around the edges, but he gets results. He brought in Westbridge. That's real value. You're focusing on interpersonal dynamics when we have a $980 million deal at stake. The Westbridge team arrives in less than 2 hours. Are you telling me you've given up? I've tried everything. Janet won't come back. Other notaries won't work with us because of Derek's reputation, and I've discovered that we can't even use a pre-notarized document. Janet has to be physically present for the 3-party signature notarization." Tom's face flushed with anger. "Then you should have prevented this situation in the first place. You should have briefed Derek on the sensitivity of vendor relationships. You should have been in that hallway managing the client experience. That's your job, Lindsay." I felt something inside me snap. My job is to coordinate transactions, not to follow executives around making sure they remember basic manners. "Your job," Tom said coldly, "is whatever it needs to be to make deals close. If you can't handle that, maybe you're in the wrong profession." I left his office shaking with anger and fear. I considered going over his head to the board of directors, but the executive assistant who managed board communications wouldn't even talk to me without Tom's approval. At 8:15, I watched from my desk as people began arriving for the closing. The Westbridge Capital team came in first. Amanda Rothstein, looking professional and sharp in a navy suit, followed by two senior partners and their financial analyst. They were shown to the large conference room on the 14th floor with panoramic views of the city. At 8:30, Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Patterson arrived. They were the sellers in this transaction, the clients who had been in that hallway yesterday when Derek shoved past them. They looked uncomfortable as they were escorted to the conference room. Derek appeared in the lobby at 8:45, perfectly groomed and exuding confidence. He greeted the Westbridge team with warm handshakes and smooth small talk, acting as if this was just another successful day in his brilliant career. I stood near the conference room, my stomach in knots, watching through the glass walls as everyone took their seats. Documents were spread across the large table. Coffee was poured. Amanda Rothstein pulled out her laptop and opened a file. At 8:50, she looked around the room and then turned to me. I had positioned myself just outside the door, hoping somehow to be invisible. She waved me inside. "Lindsay, is Janet Cooper here? I need to review Exhibit C with her before we proceed with signatures." Every person in the room turned to look at me. My mouth went dry. This was the moment where everything fell apart. "Janet couldn't make it this morning," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Amanda's expression changed instantly from pleasant professionalism to cold concern. "That's unacceptable. Janet notarized our preliminary documents 4 weeks ago. For chain of custody and compliance purposes, she must notarize the final exhibit. That was explicitly stated in our requirements document sent to your firm 6 weeks ago." Derek immediately jumped into action, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Amanda, I apologize for the confusion. There was a scheduling mix-up on our end. Lindsay was supposed to coordinate Janet's availability, but there was a miscommunication. However, we have another excellent notary standing by who can handle the notarization. Fully qualified and experienced with transactions of this scale." I stared at him. We had no such person. He was lying. Amanda shook her head firmly. "No, that doesn't work for us. Our legal compliance team requires the same notary throughout the entire documentation chain. This is non-negotiable. We cannot proceed without Janet Cooper." She began gathering her papers and placing them back in her briefcase. The two partners exchanged glances. The financial analyst closed his laptop. Derek's face went pale beneath his tan. "Amanda, surely we can work something out. This is a minor administrative issue." "This is a breach of our engagement terms," Amanda said crisply. "We were very clear about our requirements. If your firm cannot meet basic contractual obligations, we need to reconsider this entire transaction." Tom Bradford, who had been sitting quietly at the head of the table, suddenly spoke up. "Let's everyone just take a breath. Amanda, give us 30 minutes to sort this out." Amanda looked at her watch. "I'll give you 15 minutes. We have another meeting at 10. She walked out with her team, leaving the rest of us in heavy silence. Tom turned to me with fury in his eyes. "This is your responsibility, Lindsay. You've mismanaged the entire vendor coordination process. How did you let this happen?" Before I could respond, Mr. Harrison, one of the sellers, spoke up. His voice was quiet but firm. "Actually, I was here yesterday when your VP pushed past us in the hallway. Janet left because of him. She told us she couldn't work with people who showed that kind of disrespect." Derek immediately countered, his voice dripping with false reasonableness. "I think there's been a misunderstanding, Mr. Harrison. I was rushing to take an important call. I may have been moving quickly, but I certainly didn't intend any disrespect. In any case, that's beside the point now. We need to focus on solutions." Mrs. Patterson, the other seller, backed up her partner. "There was no misunderstanding. You knocked coffee onto my jacket and didn't even acknowledge it. Janet saw the whole thing. That's why she left." Derek spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "You're emotionally invested in this transaction as sellers. I understand that, but we need to maintain professionalism here. The fact is that Lindsay failed to manage our vendor relationships appropriately." Tom stood up. "Lindsay, go home. We'll assess the situation and be in touch." I knew what that meant. I was being fired. The room started to feel smaller, my vision tunneling slightly. I nodded wordlessly and walked out. Amanda and her team were in a smaller conference room down the hall. speaking in low, serious tones. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 minutes, Amanda emerged and walked back to the main conference room. I lingered in the hallway, unable to leave, needing to know how this ended. Amanda's voice was clear and professional as she delivered her verdict. After consulting with my team and our home office, Westbridge Capital is formally withdrawing from this transaction. We cannot proceed with a firm that fails to meet basic contractual requirements and professional standards. You'll receive a formal letter of withdrawal by end of business today. She paused, and I could hear the edge in her voice. We're also considering whether this incident needs to be reported to the State Bar Association, given the irregularities around notary protocol and documentation chain. I heard chairs scraping, people standing, the sounds of a deal collapsing. The Westbridge team walked past me in the hallway, their faces grim and professional. Amanda made brief eye contact with me, but said nothing. Within minutes, Tom Bradford emerged and called an emergency meeting of all senior staff. I wasn't explicitly uninvited, so I slipped into the back of the conference room feeling like a ghost. Tom was apoplectic. His face was red, his voice tight with controlled rage. We just lost the largest transaction in this firm's history, $980 million. The fees alone would have been $12 million. Someone is going to answer for this. Derek had already prepared his narrative. He stood up, looking appropriately serious and concerned. Tom, I think we need to have a frank conversation about accountability. Lindsay was solely responsible for vendor coordination on this deal. She failed to maintain professional relationships with key service providers. She didn't escalate problems appropriately. She didn't have backup plans. This failure rests squarely on her shoulders. He pulled up emails on the conference room screen showing selective excerpts that made me look disorganized and unprepared. He'd been building this case against me, I realized. Covering his tracks. Carol Hendricks, my direct supervisor, threw me under the bus to save herself. I have to admit, I did notice Lindsay seemed overwhelmed with her workload lately. Perhaps she was in over her head on a transaction of this magnitude. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Tom cut me off with a sharp gesture. I don't want to hear excuses. The bottom line is that this firm just suffered a catastrophic loss because of negligence and poor coordination. Lindsay, you're terminated effective immediately for gross negligence and failure to perform essential job functions. Security will escort you out. The words hit me like physical blows. 7 years of dedication, loyalty, and hard work erased in a moment. 2 security guards appeared at the conference room door. I walked out in a daze as they followed me to my desk. I packed my personal belongings into a cardboard box while my former colleagues watched from their desks, some with sympathy, others with relief that they weren't the ones being escorted out. Photos of my mother, a coffee mug my niece had given me, a small plant that had somehow survived on my desk for 3 years. The walk through the lobby felt endless. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. The security guards were professional but firm, making sure I didn't linger. As I pushed through the revolving door into the bright morning sunlight, tears finally started streaming down my face. My career was over. My reputation was destroyed. How would I pay my bills? How would I explain this to my mother? How would I ever get another job in this industry after being fired for gross negligence? I was standing on the sidewalk, trying to compose myself enough to walk to my car, when I heard a familiar voice. Lindsay? Oh my God, what happened? I looked up to see Janet Cooper walking toward the building entrance. She was carrying her leather portfolio, dressed professionally, clearly here for a client appointment. Her face showed immediate concern when she saw my tear-stained face and the box of belongings in my arms. They fired me, I managed to say, my voice breaking. The deal fell through. I got blamed for everything. Janet looked horrified. She glanced at the security guards standing behind me, then back at me. What do you mean? What happened with the deal? One of the security guards, an older gentleman named Frank, who had always been kind to me, spoke quietly. She got fired. The big deal fell through because the notary didn't show. That's what they're saying, anyway. Janet's face went pale. She fumbled for her phone, scrolling quickly through her emails. Wait. I received an email at 6 this morning from someone named Derek Paulson, saying the meeting was moved to next week. Then I got another message 20 minutes ago telling me to come in today, after all, for a different client matter. I assumed there were two separate appointments. She showed me her phone. The emails were there, exactly as she described. But something looked odd about the sender address. "Janet, can I see that?" I asked, my investigative instincts kicking in despite my emotional state. She handed me the phone. I looked at the domain closely. It wasn't the firm's actual email domain. It was off by one letter. Instead of bradfordfinancial.com, it said bradfordfinancial.com. A nearly perfect forgery. "Janet, these emails aren't from our firm. Someone impersonated us. Look at the domain." Her eyes widened as she saw it. "Oh my God. Someone deliberately sent me false information to make sure I wouldn't be there for your closing." Derek had sabotaged his own deal. But why? What could he possibly gain from tanking a $980 million transaction? And then it hit me. He'd set me up to fail so spectacularly that no one would question his version of events. He'd built his reputation by creating scapegoats. But I was already fired. The security guards were waiting for me to leave. I had no standing, no authority, no way to prove anything. Janet looked at me with determination in her eyes. "This is fraud. We need to report this." "I have no proof," I said bitterly. "Those emails came from a fake domain. Derek will just deny it. And I'm the disgruntled fired employee. Who's going to believe me?" The security guards were getting impatient. Frank touched my elbow gently. "Miss, you need to leave the property now." I nodded, defeated. Janet grabbed my arm. "Give me your number. Don't give up on this. Something is very wrong here." I gave her my cell number, but I had no hope left. I walked to my car in the parking garage, put the box of my belongings in the trunk, and sat in the driver's seat, completely numb. My phone buzzed with text messages, some from colleagues expressing sympathy, one from Derek, eerily cheerful. "Sorry it didn't work out. Best of luck in your future endeavors." I drove home in a fog, barely remembering the route. My small apartment felt suffocating when I walked in. I set the box down and collapsed on my couch. My phone rang. My mother. I couldn't bring myself to answer. She would want to know how my day went, and I couldn't tell her I'd been fired. Not yet. Not until I figured out what to do next. I spent the next 2 days in my apartment, barely eating, sleeping at odd hours, unable to face the reality of what had happened. My LinkedIn profile started showing notifications. Derek had posted something about tough decisions and the importance of accountability in building successful teams. Several people from the firm had liked it. I checked job boards half-heartedly, but who would hire someone fired for gross negligence on a multi-million-dollar deal? Derek's version of events was already becoming industry gossip. On the 3rd day after my firing, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Lindsay, this is Janet Cooper. I've been doing some investigating. Can we meet? I think I found something important." Janet and I met at a quiet coffee shop far from the financial district, a neighborhood place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. I arrived first, ordering a coffee I didn't really want, sitting at a corner table where I could see the door. When Janet walked in, she was carrying a folder thick with papers. She sat down across from me, her expression serious but determined. "I've spent the last 3 days talking to people in the notary professional community," she began. "Derek Paulson's name has come up before. Not with specifics, but enough red flags that people remembered him." She opened the folder and spread out printed emails and documents. "These fake emails he sent me? I had a colleague who works in digital forensics take a look. The domain was registered the day before our original closing was supposed to happen. It was paid for with a prepaid debit card, but there's a digital trail." My exhaustion started to lift slightly, replaced by a flicker of something that might have been hope. "Can we trace it to Derek?" "Not directly. Not yet. But here's what else I found." She pulled out a printout from a Chicago business journal. Derek worked at Merrill Strategic Partners in Chicago 18 months ago. He left under what they call unclear circumstances. There was a failed deal around the time he left. I read the article. It was vague, mentioning a significant transaction that did not close and personnel changes at the firm, but no specific details about Derek. I called the firm, Janet continued. I said I was doing background research on a potential business partner. They wouldn't tell me much officially, but the receptionist transferred me to someone who used to work there, a woman named Suzanne Riley. She's now at a different company, but she was willing to talk to me. Lindsay, Derek, did exactly the same thing to her. My hands started shaking. What do you mean? Suzanne was a project manager. Derek set her up to fail on a major deal, then positioned himself as the person who identified the problem. She got fired. He got promoted. She's been struggling to find work ever since because Derek spread rumors about her incompetence. I felt sick. This was Derek's pattern. This was how he operated. Suzanne kept documentation, Janet said. Emails, meeting notes, everything. She knew something was wrong even though she couldn't prove it at the time. She's willing to share it with you. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I glanced at it reflexively, then froze. The sender was Amanda Rothstein from Westbridge Capital. Dear Lindsay, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. The circumstances of our deal's collapse have been bothering me. In reviewing our files, I found some communications inconsistencies that don't add up. Would you be willing to speak with me confidentially? I'm not making any commitments, but I believe there's more to this story than what we were told. Best regards, Amanda. I showed the email to Janet, my heart pounding. Should I respond? Absolutely, Janet said firmly. She's offering you a lifeline. I replied immediately, my fingers flying over my phone's keyboard. Amanda, thank you for reaching out. Yes, I would very much like to speak with you. I'm available at your convenience. The response came within 10 minutes. Can you talk now? Here's my direct line. I stepped outside the coffee shop to make the call, my hands trembling as I dialed. Amanda answered on the second ring. Lindsay, thank you for calling. I'll get straight to the point. Something about your deal collapse felt orchestrated. My team and I reviewed the timeline, and there were too many convenient coincidences. Then I contacted Janet Cooper directly to confirm her availability for our closing, and she told me about the fraudulent emails. My breath caught. You talked to Janet? Yesterday. She showed me the fake domain, explained the timing. That's when I started digging deeper into Derek Paulson's background. Lindsay, I found red flags, issues at his previous firm, a pattern of deals that collapsed in ways that somehow benefited him. I can't get involved officially. My firm has its own liability to consider. But off the record, if you can document a pattern of fraud, my company would be very interested in that information. Why? I asked. Your deal already fell through. Because we're considering a lawsuit against Bradford Financial for our due diligence costs, travel expenses, and lost opportunity costs. We spent considerable resources on a transaction that collapsed due to what appears to be intentional sabotage. But we need to understand the full picture before we proceed. We need the truth. My mind was racing. Derek threatened to destroy my career if I interfered with his work. He's already succeeding. I have no money for lawyers, no standing in the company, and his version of events is the official record. You have something more valuable than standing, Amanda said quietly. You have the truth, and you have people who are willing to help you prove it. Janet Cooper contacted me, remember. She believed in you enough to investigate. There was a pause, then Amanda continued. There's something else you should know. Derek is already working on another major deal. $900 million with Thornhill Investment Group. He announced it publicly 2 days ago. He's calling it his comeback transaction. My stomach dropped. He's going to do this to someone else. Exactly, which is why we need to stop him. Lindsay, I can't promise you anything official, but if you can build a case, document his pattern, show that he's engaged in fraudulent behavior, there are people who will listen, Westbridge included. After I hung up, I went back inside the coffee shop. Janet was waiting, watching me with concern. Amanda Rothstein says Derek is about to close another huge deal, I told her. We have 2 weeks before he ruins someone else's life. Janet nodded slowly. Then we have work to do. I'll contact Suzanne Riley and see if she can come here. We'll compare notes, build a timeline, gather every piece of evidence we can find. For the first time in days, I felt something other than despair. I felt anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, determined kind that fuels action. Derek had destroyed my career, my reputation, and my financial security. He'd done it to Suzanne Riley. He'd probably done it to others we hadn't found yet, and he was about to do it again. But this time, we were going to be ready for him. Suzanne Riley flew in from Chicago 3 days later. We met at Janet's office, a neutral space where we could spread out documents and talk freely. Suzanne was in her late 30s, with tired eyes that suggested she'd been fighting her own battle for a long time. I saved everything, she said, pulling folders from her briefcase. After Derek got me fired, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. So I kept every email, every text message, every document related to our failed deal. She laid out the paper trail from her situation 18 months ago. The pattern was eerily familiar. A major transaction, a sudden crisis that seemed to come from nowhere, Derek positioning himself as both the concerned executive and the person who identified the failure. Suzanne had been blamed for not catching a critical error in documentation. She was fired. Derek was promoted to VP. But here's what I found later, Suzanne continued, pulling out bank records. 3 months after I was fired, Derek received a significant bonus. The official reason was performance and client retention. But I talked to people still at the firm. Derek had convinced our former client to bring their business to his next company. He basically used our failed deal as a springboard to his next position. Janet was taking notes, creating a timeline. So he doesn't just sabotage deals randomly. He's strategic about it. He creates chaos, positions himself as valuable to the client, then leverages that relationship for his own advancement. Exactly, Suzanne said. And meanwhile, the person he blamed gets blacklisted. I couldn't get a decent job for 8 months. Even now, I'm working for less money than I was making before, and I'm still rebuilding my professional reputation. I felt a connection with Suzanne, a kinship born from shared trauma. We'd both been Derek's victims. Both suffered because one man had decided our careers were acceptable collateral damage for his ambitions. We need to find out if there are others, I said. If we can show this is a pattern, not just 2 isolated incidents, we have a real case. Over the next week, we became amateur investigators. Janet used her connections in the professional services community. Suzanne reached out to people from Derek's previous firms. I scoured online business records and professional networking sites. We found 2 more people. A paralegal named Emily Dawson, who'd been fired from Derek's firm before Chicago, and a junior analyst named Brian Foster, who'd quit after Derek made his work life unbearable, even though Brian hadn't been blamed for any specific failure. All of them had stories. All of them had suffered. And all of them were willing to help if it meant stopping Derek. But we still needed the smoking gun. We needed direct proof that Derek had committed fraud, not just created hostile work environments or been a terrible boss. The break came from an unexpected source. Suzanne's brother worked in IT security. When Suzanne told him about the fake email domain that had been used to deceive Janet, he offered to help trace it. Prepaid cards aren't as anonymous as people think, he explained over a video call. There are digital fingerprints, transaction timestamps, IP addresses, patterns of use. He worked for 3 days, building a forensic analysis of the fake domain and the prepaid card used to purchase it. And then he found it. The same prepaid card had been used to register multiple domains over the past 2 years. Domains that were variations on Derek's various employers' official addresses. All of them created just before major deals that eventually fell through. This is serial fraud, Suzanne's brother said. This guy has been running the same scam over and over. We had our evidence, but we still faced a major problem: how to use it. I had no legal standing. I was a fired employee with an axe to grind. Derek had powerful allies and resources. That's when Janet remembered something. Derek's new deal is with Thornhill Investment Group. I've worked with their compliance attorney, Philip Warren. He's meticulous, ethical, and he doesn't tolerate fraud. Would he meet with us? I asked. I think so. Let me reach out. Janet arranged a meeting for the following Monday. Philip Warren agreed to see us, though he made it clear he was doing so as a courtesy to Janet and couldn't make any commitments on behalf of his firm. We spent the weekend preparing our presentation, document timelines, witness statements, the forensic analysis of the fraudulent domains, everything organized and indexed. Monday morning, we arrived at Thornhill Investment Group's offices. Philip Warren was a man in his mid-50s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened as we walked him through everything we'd found. When we finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "This is disturbing. If what you're telling me is accurate, Derek Paulson has been committing fraud across multiple transactions and multiple firms." "It's all documented," Janet said, gesturing to the evidence spread across his conference table. "Documentation is good. But we can't back out of a deal based on suspicion or even strong evidence of past wrongdoing at other companies." However, he paused meaningfully. "We can be extraordinarily careful about our own documentation and due diligence. We can make sure every requirement is met to the letter. And if irregularities appear in our transaction, we can respond appropriately." I understood what he was saying. He couldn't act on our information alone, but he could create conditions where Derek's fraudulent behavior would be exposed if he tried it again. "When is your closing scheduled?" I asked. 2 weeks from today. Derek has been pushing for it to happen quickly. Now I understand why. Less time for scrutiny. We spent the next hour with Philip and his team, going through every detail of Thornhill's deal structure, identifying vulnerable points where fraud could occur, and establishing checkpoints to verify authenticity. As we were wrapping up, Philip said something that gave me hope. "If Derek Paulson attempts anything fraudulent during our transaction, we'll have the evidence to pursue criminal charges. And if that happens, your documentation of his pattern will be crucial to the prosecution." We were setting a trap, and Derek, arrogant and overconfident, was walking straight into it. But I underestimated how dangerous cornering a predator could be. That night, my phone rang at 11:30. The number was blocked. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. "Hello?" "Lindsay." Derek's voice was cold, controlled, threatening. "I heard you've been asking questions, talking to people from my past, meeting with attorneys at Thornhill." My blood ran cold. How did he know? Who had told him? "I'm not doing anything illegal," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're a disgruntled former employee spreading lies. That's defamation. I could sue you into bankruptcy. I could make sure you never work again, not just in finance, but in any industry. You'll be serving coffee for minimum wage for the rest of your life. I'm telling the truth." "Truth?" He laughed, a harsh sound. "I have documentation of your failures. I have a dozen colleagues who'll testify to your incompetence. I have lawyers and resources. You have nothing. If you interfere with my Thornhill deal, I will destroy you so completely that you'll wish you'd never heard my name." He hung up before I could respond. I sat there shaking, my phone still in my hand. Derek's threat was real. He had money, connections, and a willingness to use them. I was unemployed, running through my savings, and taking on a powerful man who had already demonstrated he knew how to destroy careers. But then my phone buzzed with a text from Janet. "Don't give up. We're close." Another message came through, this time from Suzanne. "He threatened me too before everything went down in Chicago. He's scared. That means we're on the right track." And finally, a longer text from Philip Warren. "I heard about Derek's call. We recorded it through your phone's metadata connection to our security system from this morning's meeting. We now have evidence of witness intimidation. Keep going." I took a deep breath. Derek thought he could scare me into silence. Instead, he'd just given us another piece of evidence. 2 weeks until the Thornhill closing. 2 weeks to make sure we had everything in place. 2 weeks until Derek either succeeded again or finally faced consequences for his actions. I wasn't giving up. Not now. Not when we were this close. The morning of Derek's Thornhill closing, I woke at 5 a.m., adrenaline coursing through my system. Janet, Suzanne, and I had spent the previous night reviewing our evidence package one final time. Every document was indexed. Every witness statement was verified. Every piece of digital forensics was backed up in multiple locations. Philip Warren had scheduled our arrival for 7:30, 90 minutes before Derek and the other parties were expected. We needed time to brief Thornhill's full legal team on what might happen. I drove to Thornhill's offices in downtown, my hands tight on the steering wheel. Janet met me in the parking garage, looking calm and professional in her notary business attire. Suzanne had flown in the night before and joined us in the lobby. Philip Warren and 3 other attorneys were waiting in a large conference room when we arrived. The evidence was spread across the table within minutes. "We've reviewed everything you've compiled," Philip said. "It's compelling, more than compelling, but we need to proceed carefully. If Derek hasn't actually committed fraud during our transaction, we can't act on evidence from other situations. However, if he attempts anything fraudulent today, we'll be ready." One of the other attorneys, a sharp woman named Catherine Mills, spoke up. "We've built in additional verification steps throughout today's process. Every document will be checked against originals. Every signature will be witnessed by multiple parties. And Janet, you're officially Thornhill's notary for this closing. Derek doesn't know that yet." The plan was elegant. We weren't trying to ambush Derek. We were simply ensuring that every rule was followed precisely. If he'd learned from past mistakes and was running a legitimate transaction, nothing would happen. But if he tried his usual tactics, he'd expose himself. At 9 o'clock, people started arriving. Derek's client, a tech entrepreneur named Bradley Simmons, came in with his CFO and attorney. They looked excited, talking about how this $900 million investment would transform their company. Derek arrived at 9:15, perfectly dressed and radiating confidence. He saw me standing near the conference room entrance, and his face went white, then immediately flushed with anger. "What is she doing here?" he demanded, looking at Philip Warren. "Miss Montgomery is here as a witness and consultant. She has relevant information about documentation protocols that may be pertinent to today's proceedings." Derek's jaw tightened, but he couldn't make a scene, not with his client and Thornhill's team watching. Tom Bradford arrived moments later. Derek had insisted the Bradford financial CEO attend to witness his success. Tom looked uncomfortable when he saw me, but said nothing. Everyone took their seats around the massive conference table. Documents were stacked neatly in front of each party. Coffee was poured. Small talk was exchanged. Then Philip Warren stood up and began the formal proceedings. "Before we begin with signatures, we need to verify the documentation chain. Mr. Simmons, your preliminary investment memorandum was dated 6 weeks ago. Can you confirm the notary who certified those documents?" Bradley Simmons checked his file. "Yes, a notary named Laura Hendricks. She came to our office." "Excellent. We've asked Ms. Hendricks to join us via video call to verify her work." A screen lit up with a woman's face. Laura Hendricks was an older notary with decades of experience. She smiled professionally at the camera. "Ms. Hendricks, can you confirm that you notarized the preliminary investment documents for Mr. Simmons' company 6 weeks ago?" Laura's face showed confusion. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any record of notarizing documents for that company. Could you give me the specific date?" Philip read the date from the document in front of him. Laura checked her detailed logs. "No, I definitely didn't notarize anything that day. I was at a wedding in Vermont. I have photographs and travel records if you need verification." The room went very quiet. Bradley Simmons pulled the document closer, examining the notary seal. "But this has her name and seal number on it." "Then it's fraudulent," Laura said calmly from the screen. "Someone forged my seal. That's a felony." Derek immediately tried to deflect. "This must be a clerical error. Someone in the document prep team must have used the wrong template. I'm sure we can sort this out quickly." "Actually," Philip said, his voice cold, "we found several other irregularities." "Catherine?" Catherine Mills stood up and began projecting images on the conference room screen. Emails with slightly wrong domains, documents with dates that didn't match meeting records. A pattern of small discrepancies that individually might be errors, but together painted a clear picture. "What is this?" Derek demanded. "Are you accusing me of something?" "We're simply noting inconsistencies," Philip said. "Given the scale of this transaction, we wanted to be thorough, and then we received some additional information from former colleagues of yours." Suzanne entered from the adjacent room where she'd been waiting. Derek's face went from red to ashen. "You," he said, his voice barely controlled. "Me," Suzanne replied calmly. "Hi, Derek. Remember Chicago? Remember how you destroyed my career after sabotaging the Merrill Partners deal?" She placed a thick folder on the table. This is documentation of a pattern of fraud spanning 3 years and 4 different firms. Fake email domains, forged notary seals, manufactured crises designed to create scapegoats while you positioned yourself for advancement. Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Patterson, the sellers from my original Westbridge deal, entered next. Then Emily Dawson and Brian Foster, Derek's other victims. One by one, they shared their experiences, placing their evidence on the growing pile. Derek stood up abruptly. "This is insane. I'm being set up. These are disgruntled former employees making false accusations." "Then explain this," Philip said, and projected the forensic analysis of the prepaid card used to purchase multiple fake email domains. This card was used to register fraudulent domains before each of your major deals. The same card, the same pattern, the same modus operandi. Tom Bradford was staring at Derek with dawning horror. "Derek, what have you done?" "I haven't done anything," Derek snarled. "This is a conspiracy. They're all lying." "We've also retrieved your threatening phone call to Miss Montgomery," Catherine added. "Witness intimidation is a crime, Mr. Paulson." Derek looked around the room like a trapped animal. His client, Bradley Simmons, was gathering his papers with disgust. "This deal is off. We're not working with frauds." "We've already contacted law enforcement," Philip said. "Officers are on their way to take your statement, Mr. Paulson. We're also filing complaints with the State Bar Association and the Financial Regulatory Commission." Derek tried to leave, but 2 security guards blocked the door. "You're not going anywhere until the police arrive," Philip said firmly. Tom Bradford stood up, his face grave. "Derek Paulson, you're terminated from Bradford Financial effective immediately. We'll be cooperating fully with law enforcement and regulatory investigations." "And Mr. Paulson," his voice dropped, "if we find that your actions expose this firm to liability, we'll be pursuing criminal charges and civil damages against you personally." Derek's facade finally cracked. He slumped back into his chair, his face in his hands. All his arrogance, all his confidence, all his power just evaporated. Tom turned to me. "Lindsay, I owe you an apology. A profound apology. We failed you. I failed you. I let myself be manipulated, and I punished you for speaking the truth. I'd like to offer you your position back, with a promotion to senior vice president and a significant salary increase." I looked at Tom Bradford, this man who'd called me incompetent and fired me for refusing to fix someone else's misconduct. I thought about how easy it would be to accept, to go back to that firm, to resume my career where it left off. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "Thank you, but no. I don't work for people who value smooth operations over integrity. I don't work for leaders who throw their employees under the bus to protect bad actors. I deserve better than that." Tom looked like I'd slapped him, but he nodded slowly. "I understand. You're right. For what it's worth, we'll be providing you with a very substantial settlement for wrongful termination, and a letter of recommendation that makes clear you were terminated in error." Before I could respond, Amanda Rothstein spoke up from the back of the room. I hadn't even noticed her arrive. "Lindsay, I'd like to offer you a position at Westbridge Capital. We're expanding our compliance and due diligence team. We need people who care about doing things right, who have the courage to speak up when something's wrong, and who can't be intimidated or bought. The salary is competitive, the benefits are excellent, and you'd be working with people who value exactly the qualities you've demonstrated." I felt tears starting to form, but these were different tears. Not tears of despair or humiliation, but of relief and vindication. "I'd be honored," I said. 6 months later, I sat in my new office at Westbridge Capital, looking out at the city skyline. The view was better than anything I'd had at Bradford Financial. But more importantly, everything about this job was better. I was part of a team that valued thoroughness over speed, integrity over convenience, truth over political expedience. My colleagues respected my judgment. My boss, Amanda Rothstein, actively encouraged me to speak up when I saw problems. It was everything my old job should have been but never was. Derek Paulson was facing criminal charges in 3 states. The investigation had uncovered even more fraud than we'd initially documented. He'd stolen at least $4 million through his various schemes, ruined at least 7 careers, and derailed deals worth billions of dollars. His trial was scheduled to begin in 3 months. Suzanne Riley had landed a fantastic position at a venture capital firm in San Francisco. Emily Dawson was thriving at a legal advocacy nonprofit. Brian Foster had started his own consulting business and was already profitable. Janet Cooper and I had become close friends, meeting for coffee every week to catch up on life and work. The settlement from Bradford Financial had covered my debts and given me a financial cushion I'd never had before. More valuable than the money was the letter Tom Bradford had written, admitting the firm's errors and praising my professional integrity. That letter had opened doors. But the real transformation wasn't external, it was internal. I'd learned that speaking up, even when it costs everything, is the only way to maintain your integrity. I'd discovered that silence in the face of wrongdoing doesn't protect you. It only protects the wrongdoer. I'd learned that when someone in power abuses their position, the most dangerous thing you can do is nothing. The most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth. Document everything, find your allies, and refuse to be intimidated. I'd learned that your career isn't defined by what happens to you, but by how you respond to what happens to you. Most importantly, I'd learned that you don't have to accept injustice just because fighting it is hard or risky. Sometimes the hardest path is the only path worth taking. My desk phone rang, pulling me from my reflection. It was Amanda. Lindsay, there's someone on line 2 for you. She says she's a junior analyst at Morrison Financial and she needs to talk to someone about a situation with her boss. She sounds scared. Would you take the call? I smiled. This was exactly why I'd joined Westbridge. This was exactly what I was supposed to do. Absolutely. Put her through. A young woman's voice came on the line, hesitant and anxious. Miss Montgomery? My name is Sarah Chen. I found your contact information through a professional networking site. I read about what happened to you, about how you stood up to fraud at your company. I think something similar is happening where I work, and I don't know what to do. My boss is setting me up to take the fall for a deal that's going wrong, and I'm terrified. I grabbed a notebook and pen. Sarah, take a breath. You did the right thing by calling. Now, tell me everything. Start from the beginning, and most importantly, document everything. Save every email. Keep records of every conversation. You're not alone in this. We're going to figure this out together. As Sarah started telling her story, I realized this was my purpose now. Not just doing my own job well, but helping others who faced what I'd faced. Being the person I'd wished existed when I needed help. The truth always has power, even when it seems like it doesn't. Sometimes that power takes time to manifest. Sometimes you have to fight for it. But it's always there, waiting for someone brave enough to speak it. I'd found my voice, and I was going to use it to help others find theirs. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew something was wrong at work, but speaking up felt too risky? How did you handle it? What would you do if you found yourself in Lindsay's position, watching someone powerful destroy others to advance their own career? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that integrity matters even when it's costly, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about everyday people who refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice. And share this with someone who might need to hear it. Someone who might be facing their own Derek Paulson and wondering if speaking up is worth the risk. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And remember, your voice matters. Your integrity matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Stay strong, stay honest, and never stop fighting for what's right.